He had always been drawn to the sound of the piano, even before he understood what music really was. The community center near his home had an old hall where classes took place, and inside that hall stood a grand piano. It wasn't new or shiny, but to him it looked magical, like something from another world. Every day after school, he walked by the building and heard someone playing, sometimes soft, sometimes loud, sometimes joyful, sometimes sad. And every time he stopped in the hallway, pressed his back to the wall, and listened carefully. The hall had a small window in the door, just enough for him to see the piano inside. He never dared to open the door or go in because the rules were strict. Only registered students could attend the classes, and he knew his family couldn't afford that. But still, he came. It was almost like something pulled him there, something he didn't understand. Most afternoons, he would sit on the floor with his school bag next to him. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined what it might feel like to sit in front of those black and white keys. The music students inside looked confident, moving their fingers fast or slow depending on the lesson. He admired them. Not a single day passed when he didn't wish he could be one of them. The teachers inside often noticed him quietly sitting outside, but they never said much. They thought he was just another kid who liked wasting time. Some even told him not to block the hallway, so he would move a little, but still stay close enough to hear every sound. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He wasn't trying to get in anyone's way. He didn't even understand why the piano fascinated him so much. All he knew was that the music made him feel things warm, hopeful, excited, even peaceful. It was like the piano told stories without using any words. Whenever the class ended, students came out laughing or complaining about how hard a piece was. They walked past him without noticing him, but he watched their hands closely, trying to remember how they moved across the keyboard. He didn't know how music worked, but he tried to memorize which finger pressed which key. For him, even that was enough. There were days when he stayed so long that the guards had to remind him the center was closing. He would pack up his things and slowly walk home, still hearing the melodies in his head. Sometimes he hummed them softly, trying not to forget them. When he reached home, he replayed the tunes over and over in his mind until he fell asleep. His family didn't know much about music. They had a simple life focused on work, school, and basic needs. There was no extra money for lessons, instruments, or special classes. When he once mentioned that he liked listening to the piano, they smiled, but didn't think much of it. They thought it was just a passing interest, like any other hobby a kid might pick up, but for him it wasn't passing. The more he listened, the more he wanted to learn. He didn't care about becoming famous or performing on stage. He just wanted to touch the piano once. Just once, to feel the keys under his fingers, to create even one small sound of his own. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The routine became part of his life. He finished school, walked to the center, sat quietly outside the hall, and listened. He never complained, never demanded anything, never expected the teachers to let him in. A small part of him hoped they would someday, but he didn't dare ask. He had already been told many times by people around him that music classes were for those who could pay, and life had taught him early that some things simply weren't meant for everyone. One afternoon, the piano player inside the hall was practicing a piece he had never heard before. It was slow at first, then fast, with notes that seemed to dance. He leaned closer to the door, completely lost in the sound. His eyes followed the movements of the students' hands. The keys looked alive, almost glowing in the soft light of the room. He wanted so badly to understand how those sounds were created. He didn't realize that one of the teachers had stepped out and seen him standing there. The teacher frowned slightly and asked, "Why are you always here? Do you need something?" The boy froze for a moment. He wasn't used to being spoken to by the teachers. He quickly shook his head and said, "No, sir, I just like the sound." The teacher looked at him for a second more and then walked away. It wasn't rude, just distant. The boy understood. The teacher had many students inside to look after. Paying students. Real students. Not someone who just sat outside every day, but even if no one inside cared, he continued coming back. Sometimes he sat closer to the window. Sometimes he even tried copying the movements of the students with his fingers on the air or on his own school bag. It probably looked silly, but to him it felt real. It felt like practice, even if silent. One day the class was learning a simple song. He had heard the tune enough times to remember most of it. As he listened, he hummed along, very softly so no one would hear. He didn't know whether he was doing it correctly, but the rhythm felt right. Suddenly, a group of students walked out for a break and noticed him humming. One of them laughed, not in a cruel way, but in a surprised, curious way. "Wow, you remember the tune?" the student said. The boy blushed, unsure whether to feel proud or embarrassed. Another student said, "You really like piano, don't you?" He nodded shyly but didn't say anything before they could ask anything more. The teacher called them back in, and they disappeared into the hall again. Their voices echoed as the door closed, and once again the hallway became quiet except for the fading music. Even though the moment was small, it made the boy's heart beat a little faster. Someone had noticed. Someone had actually seen him. For the first time he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't invisible. Later that same week, he made a decision he had never dared to make before. After listening for a while, he stood up, took a deep breath, and waited near the door until the class ended. When the last student came out, the teacher followed behind. The boy stepped forward slowly. "Sir, can I ask something?" he said in a small but steady voice. The teacher looked surprised. "Yes?" he swallowed hard. Can I touch the piano?" "Just once? I won't take long. I just want to try one key." The teacher's face softened for a second, but only for a second. Then he shook his head. "I'm sorry. That piano is for students only. It's school property. We can't let everyone play it." The boy nodded, forcing a smile, trying to hide the disappointment. "Okay, sir. Thank you." The teacher walked away, and the hallway felt colder than usual. The boy sat back on the floor, hugging his bag. He didn't cry or complain. He was used to hearing no in life. But this no hurt more because he had hoped for something different. Still, even after being denied, he didn't stop coming. The music called him every day, like a quiet voice reminding him to keep listening, to keep hoping. Even if he didn't know what he was hoping for anymore, he didn't know it yet. But the day everything changed was coming soon, much sooner than he ever expected. After that first gentle refusal, he thought maybe he had asked too soon. Maybe he wasn't ready. Or maybe it just wasn't meant to happen. But the music had planted a seed inside him that wouldn't go away. Every note he heard whispered to him, telling him to try again, to never give up. And that's exactly what he did. The next day, he returned to the hallway outside the music room. His bag was slung over his shoulder, and his shoes scuffed against the worn tiles as he walked. He found his usual spot near the window, sat down, and pressed his back against the wall. From here, he could hear the piano clearly. The notes floated out from the hall, soft and sweet, curling around him. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the music fill him. He wanted to play so badly that it almost hurt. Not in a dramatic, overwhelming way, but in that quiet, knowing way that makes your mind focus on one thing. He tried to imagine the piano under his fingers, the black and white keys, the gentle pressure, the sound moving through the room. He pictured himself pressing a key and hearing a note that was his own, even if just for a moment. But he was still a visitor in the hallway, not in the class. The students inside practiced with ease, their hands gliding across the keys. The boy watched them carefully, learning how their fingers curved, how their wrists moved, how their bodies seemed to sway with the music. He studied everything. Notebooks lay open on music stands, filled with symbols he didn't understand yet, but he looked at them anyway. He wanted to remember every detail. Days passed. He kept returning, and each day his desire grew stronger. Sometimes he tried to hum the tunes he had heard. Sometimes he tapped his fingers on his bag, trying to imagine the movements. Each day, he learned a little more about rhythm, timing, and melody just by observing and listening. It was like the music was teaching him, even though no teacher had ever touched his hand or explained a single note. At first, most of the people around him didn't notice. Teachers walked past without a second glance. Students left the building without even glancing at him. Some kids, though, began to whisper. "There he is again," one said. "He just stands there all the time." They laughed, sometimes teasing him gently, calling him the piano ghost or the hallway listener. The boy didn't respond. He had learned long ago not to react to comments like that. It didn't matter if they laughed. What mattered was the music. One day his courage grew a little more. He waited after class, watching the students leave. The teacher stayed behind to check some papers, and the boy stepped forward again. He tried to speak calmly. "Sir, could I maybe just touch the piano again? I won't take long. I promise." The teacher sighed. He looked at the boy with a mixture of patience and frustration. "I've told you before, it's not possible. You aren't a registered student. The piano is for classes. You can't just play whenever you want." The boy nodded, swallowing the disappointment. He forced a smile and muttered, "I understand. Thank you anyway." He walked home slowly that day, thinking about how much he wanted to play. His family noticed he was quieter than usual. "What's on your mind?" someone asked. He shook his head. "Nothing," he said. But inside, he felt a storm of hope and longing. He knew he had to keep trying, no matter how many times he was told no. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. One of the volunteers at the community center, a kind man who occasionally helped the classes, noticed the boy standing quietly by the hall. He had seen him before, always sitting outside, always listening. But this time he saw something different. The boy was humming along softly to the tune being played inside. Not just random humming, he matched the notes almost perfectly. With the melody, the volunteer watched for a moment, amazed. He thought, how can someone do that without lessons? The boy's lips moved quietly, his head bobbed slightly to the rhythm, and his eyes followed the invisible lines of the music. It was as if he had absorbed everything by simply listening day after day, month after month. Curious, the volunteer stepped closer. "Hey," he said gently, trying not to startle the boy. The boy froze but didn't run away. He turned slowly and gave a small, shy smile. "Yes?" he asked. The volunteer's eyes lit up. You can hum along perfectly. Have you ever tried playing the piano?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. They don't let me." His voice was soft but honest. "I've only ever listened." The volunteer nodded, looking thoughtful. He went into the hall and explained to the teacher what he had seen. The teacher frowned. "He's just a kid. He can't play. We can't just let him touch the piano." But the volunteer persisted. "I don't think you understand. He knows the music already. I've never seen anything like it. Just give him one chance. One note. That's all I'm asking." After a few tense moments, the teacher finally agreed. "Fine, one note, supervised, that's it. But if he breaks any rules, he leaves immediately." The boy couldn't believe it when he heard this. One note? Just one. His heart raced. He imagined his fingers touching the keys, imagining the sound, imagining the music moving through the room. He had dreamed of this moment for months, years, almost. When the day arrived, he walked into the hall with trembling hands. The volunteer stayed by his side, giving him gentle encouragement. The students paused and watched curiously. Some whispered to each other, wondering what would happen. The boy sat in front of the piano, feeling the cool keys under his fingers for the first time. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed a single key. The sound filled the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. It was his. And when he pressed the next key, then another, a melody slowly emerged. The students' mouths dropped open, the teacher's eyes widened, and the volunteers' hands shook with excitement. The boy had never taken a lesson, never touched a piano before. And yet he was playing a tune almost flawlessly. Everyone in the room realized something important in that moment. Talent sometimes hides in places you never expect. The boy, who had been denied over and over, who had waited outside for months, had something inside him that could not be ignored. The music flowed from his fingers as naturally as breathing. That day changed everything. The boy had started as an outsider, a visitor to the world of music. But now, he had shown that his patience, his love for music, and his persistence mattered more than rules or expectations. People began to see him differently. They started to notice his dedication, his focus, and the quiet determination that had kept him coming back day after day. No matter how many times he had been told no, the hall, which had always seemed so far away and unreachable, suddenly felt a little closer. He had taken the first real step toward a dream he had longed for, and nothing could take that away. He walked home that day with a smile he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that this was only the beginning, and even though he didn't know what would happen next, he finally understood that if he kept believing and trying, doors would start to open, even doors that had seemed permanently closed, and from that moment on, he didn't just stand outside listening. He started imagining the possibilities of what he could do if he got the chance. The music had called him for years, and now he had answered. After that first magical moment at the piano, something inside him changed. He felt alive in a way he hadn't before. The sound of the keys beneath his fingers, the vibrations traveling through his hands, the music filling the room, it was as if the world had opened a new door just for him. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay there forever. The volunteer who had given him the chance noticed the boy's excitement. "You have something special," he said quietly. "You have to keep going. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The boy nodded, his eyes shining. He wanted to say so much more, but words didn't come. He only knew one thing. He wanted to play again, and he wanted to learn. The teacher, however, remained cautious. He had seen many children try once and then give up. He didn't want to get his hopes up. "One note doesn't mean much," the teacher said sternly. "You need lessons, practice, and discipline. This is not just about wanting to play. You have to work for it." The boy understood. He didn't mind. He was ready to work. He had waited so long, endured so much disappointment, and faced countless no's from people who didn't understand. Now, for the first time, he had a glimpse of possibility. And he was willing to do whatever it took. Over the next few days, he returned to the hall as often as he could. The volunteer found a way to sneak him short sessions on the piano when the classes weren't in use. At first, it was only a few minutes each day. He would sit, take a deep breath, and try to reproduce the melodies he had memorized. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but each attempt taught him something new. He discovered that playing the piano was not just about pressing the keys. It was about feeling the music. It was about listening with your heart, not just your ears. He learned to notice the pauses between notes, the rise and fall of each melody, the way one sound flowed into the next. It wasn't easy. His fingers hurt at first, and sometimes he hit the wrong keys. But he kept going day after day without complaining. The students in the classes started noticing him more too. Some were curious. "Did you hear him play?" One whispered to another. "It's unbelievable. He's never had lessons, and yet he knows the tunes perfectly." Some students were skeptical, thinking it might be a fluke. Others were quietly impressed. They began to watch him from a distance, wondering if he could really keep it up. The boy didn't let their opinions affect him. He was focused on the piano, on the music, on the feeling that came when his fingers touched the keys. It was as if every note spoke directly to him, telling him to continue, to never give up, to believe that he could do something extraordinary. One afternoon, the volunteer decided to test him. "Try something new," he suggested. "You've learned these tunes by listening, but can you make something of your own? Even a short melody?" The boy hesitated. He had never composed music before. He didn't even know where to start. But then he closed his eyes, let his fingers rest lightly on the keys, and listened to the music in his mind. Slowly, carefully, he began pressing keys one after another, experimenting with sounds, trying to create something that felt right. To his surprise, it worked. A small, simple melody emerged. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. He played it over and over, refining it as he went. The volunteer smiled, amazed. "You've got creativity too," he said. "Not just memory, not just talent. You can make music your own." The boy felt a rush of pride and excitement. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just imitating music anymore. He was becoming a musician. He could feel the possibilities opening up before him. He could feel the power of his own hands creating something beautiful, something that had never existed before. Word began to spread about the boy who had learned music by listening. Some teachers were skeptical, thinking it was just a one-time thing, but others began to pay attention. They watched him play during these small sessions, noticing the focus in his eyes, the steady rhythm of his hands, the joy in his expression. They realized that this boy had something rare: determination, patience, and a natural gift for understanding music. One day, the teacher who had originally refused him asked the volunteer quietly, "Do you really think he can learn properly?" The volunteer nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. He has talent, yes, but more importantly, he has dedication. He wants it more than anyone I've met. He's ready to learn." After some discussion, the teacher agreed to give him formal lessons, but with strict conditions. He had to show up on time, practice every day, and follow all the rules of the classes. No shortcuts, no exceptions. The boy agreed immediately, without hesitation. He didn't care about rules or conditions. He just wanted the chance to learn. His first official lesson was nerve-wracking. He had never sat in a real class before. Other students were already practicing, reading music from sheets, playing scales he didn't know. He felt small, unsure, like he didn't belong. But then he remembered how long he had waited for this moment. He remembered all the times he had listened from the hallway, all the notes he had memorized, all the dreams he had held quietly in his heart. Taking a deep breath, he placed his fingers on the keys. The teacher asked him to play a simple scale. He hesitated for a second, then pressed the first key. Slowly, carefully, he moved through the scale, making sure each note was correct. The teacher nodded, surprised. "Good, that's better than I expected." The boy smiled. He felt encouraged, but he knew he still had a long way to go. Every lesson was a challenge. Sometimes he struggled to read the music. Sometimes his fingers didn't move the way he wanted. But he never gave up. He practiced every day, sometimes for hours at home on an old keyboard his family had borrowed. Every mistake was a lesson, every success a small victory. The students in his class began to notice him differently. The ones who had once laughed or ignored him now watched him with curiosity, sometimes admiration. They saw that he worked harder than anyone else, that he listened more carefully than anyone else, and that he was slowly improving, note by note. Day by day, the boy began to make friends in the class, too. They asked him questions about how he learned to play by ear. He shared what he could, explaining how he had memorized melodies, practiced silently, and focused on the feeling of music rather than just the notes. Some students found it inspiring. Others were amazed that someone could have learned so much without formal lessons. One day, the volunteer suggested something exciting. "There's a small community recital next month," he said. "Would you like to perform?" The boy's heart raced. He had never performed in front of an audience before. The thought scared him but also thrilled him. He nodded. "Yes, I want to try." For the next few weeks he prepared for the recital. He practiced tirelessly, refining every melody, correcting every mistake, and learning to control his nerves. Each day he felt more confident, more connected to the piano, more certain that he could share his music with others. By the time the recital arrived, he was ready. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the piano, but he took a deep breath and remembered all the months of listening, learning, and waiting. He remembered the long hours in the hallway, the refusals, the patience, and the dedication. And then, slowly, he began to play. The notes flowed from his fingers, soft at first, then strong, confident, and beautiful. The audience was silent, mesmerized. Even the teacher who had doubted him watched with wide eyes. The music told a story of perseverance, hope, and passion. And the boy realized something important. The journey mattered just as much as the performance. Every no he had faced, every moment he had waited outside, had led him to this point. By the time he finished, the hall erupted in applause. People cheered, some with tears in their eyes. The boy felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling of accomplishment he had never known before. For the first time, he understood that dreams could come true not easily. Not instantly, but with patience, determination, and belief in oneself. That recital marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He was no longer just the boy who listened from the hallway. He had become a student, a performer, and most importantly, a musician. And he knew that as long as he kept practicing, learning, and believing, the music would guide him to even greater things. The day had finally arrived, the day he would perform in front of a real audience for the very first time. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might leap out of his chest. He woke up early, barely able to eat breakfast, thinking about the piano and the people waiting to hear him play. He had practiced countless times, but now the thought of everyone watching made his stomach twist into nervous knots. His family offered words of encouragement, though they could see his anxiety. "You can do it," someone said. "Just play like you always do when no one is watching." He nodded, grateful for their support. He knew he had practiced for months, learning more each day, but now the challenge was different. This wasn't just a practice session. This was real. There would be people clapping, whispering, judging, and cheering, all at the same time. When he arrived at the community hall, the place was buzzing with excitement. Families, students, and volunteers filled the seats. The other performers had already gone on stage, each presenting something polished and rehearsed. He felt small compared to them, unsure if he belonged. He clutched the edge of the piano bench and took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The volunteer who had first noticed him gave him a reassuring nod. "You've worked hard for this. Trust yourself," he said softly. The boy nodded again, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. He walked toward the piano carefully, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingertips. The audience was quiet now, waiting for him to begin. All eyes were on him. For a moment, he froze. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but reality was different. The silence was heavy, almost overwhelming. But then he remembered all the months he had spent standing outside the music room, listening to others play. He remembered the times he had been told no, the times he had gone home disappointed, the nights he had hummed melodies to himself, and the moments he had practiced in secret. He realized that he had already faced bigger challenges than this. Sitting in front of the piano now was just another step. He exhaled slowly and let his fingers rest on the keys. He pressed the first note, soft but clear. It sounded in the hall like a spark lighting a fire. The second note came more confidently. Then the third, and soon a melody began to flow. His hands moved naturally across the keys, almost like they had been made to fit there. The notes rose and fell, carrying emotion with them, joy, hope, longing, and a quiet strength that filled the room. He didn't just play the piano. He told a story with every chord, every pause, every gentle press of the keys. The audience was silent, completely absorbed. Some leaned forward in their seats, as if they could hear not just the music, but the boy's journey, every struggle, and every dream that had led to this moment. Even the teachers who had once doubted him watched in awe. They had seen students practice tirelessly for years, but this boy had learned in a different way. He had absorbed the music, felt it in his heart, and now shared it with the world in a way that was pure and moving. The melody grew stronger, more confident. The boy's fingers danced across the keys with skill and precision, creating harmonies that seemed impossible for someone with so little formal training. His expression was calm, yet full of intensity. He didn't look at the audience, didn't glance at the sheet music. He was lost in the music itself, and in that loss he found freedom as he played. Memories flooded back, the long afternoons outside the music hall, listening through the window. The times he had been refused the chance to touch the piano. The days when he had practiced quietly on his old borrowed keyboard at home. All of it had led to this performance. Each note he played was a testament to patience, determination, and belief in himself. When the final note lingered in the air and faded, there was a moment of silence. The audience was stunned. No one moved, no one spoke. They had witnessed something rare, a performance not just of skill, but of pure heart and courage. And then the applause erupted, loud and overwhelming, echoing through the hall. People stood, clapped, cheered, and some even wiped away tears. The boy sat back, breathless, feeling a warmth in his chest that words could not describe. He had done it. He had shared his music with others. He had faced the fear, the doubt, and the long wait, and now he had triumphed. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about proving to himself that his patience, his love for music, and his dedication had meaning. After the performance, many people came to congratulate him. Volunteers, teachers, and even students who had once ignored or teased him now spoke with admiration. "You're amazing," one student said. "I can't believe you learned all this by yourself." Another added, "You're playing. It's like it's telling a story. I've never heard anything like it." The boy smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He knew he still had a long way to go. There were scales to practice, pieces to learn, and techniques to master. But for the first time, he felt recognized, not just as a kid who liked to listen, but as someone who had a gift, a talent, and a voice in the world of music. The teacher who had once denied him approached cautiously. I underestimated you," he said quietly. "You have natural talent, yes, but more than that, you have dedication. That is rare. You've shown us all something important today." The boy nodded, understanding that recognition wasn't about applause alone, but about being seen for his effort, patience, and persistence. The volunteer smiled proudly. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Imagine what you can do if you keep learning, keep practicing, and keep believing." The boy's eyes lit up. He had dreamed of touching the piano for so long, but now he realized that dreams could grow bigger than he had ever imagined. That night, when he returned home, he placed his hands on the old keyboard he had been using for practice. The notes felt different now, richer, deeper. He didn't need an audience or a hall. The music was inside him, and he could share it any time. He played quietly, imagining the faces of the audience and the applause, but also feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had worked for this moment. From that day on, things changed in subtle but important ways. Teachers offered more guidance. The community center found ways to give him extra practice time. Other students sought his advice, curious about how he learned music without lessons. He felt respected and encouraged, but he remained humble. He knew that talent alone wasn't enough. Hard work, focus, and patience were just as important as the notes on the piano. Over the next few months, he performed at small community events, sometimes in front of only a few people, sometimes in larger gatherings. Each time, he felt a mixture of nerves and excitement, but the fear never stopped him. He had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite the fear. And he carried that lesson with him every time he sat at the piano. The boy also began experimenting with composing small pieces of his own. He realized that music was not just about copying what others had done, but about expressing himself. He created melodies that told stories of hope, struggle, patience, and triumph. People listened and felt the emotions he put into each note. Some cried, some smiled, and some simply sat quietly, lost in the beauty of the music. What amazed everyone most was not just his skill, but his love for music. Every note he played carried a part of his heart. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing a piece of himself through sound. And in that sharing, he inspired others, children and adults alike, to pursue what they loved. Even if the path seemed impossible. By the time he looked back on that first performance, he realized that everything had led to this moment. The refusals, the long waits outside the music hall, the teasing, the doubts, they had all taught him patience, determination, and resilience. Without those struggles, he might not have appreciated the music as deeply, or played with as much heart. He knew the journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, still pieces to master, still lessons to learn. But for the first time, he understood something crucial. The music didn't just belong to the piano. It belonged to him, to his hands, to his heart, and to anyone willing to listen. And he promised himself that he would never stop playing, never stop learning, and never stop sharing the music that had carried him this far. That day, when he left the hall, he felt taller, stronger, and more certain of himself. He had faced fear, doubt, and years of waiting, and he had emerged not only as a musician but as someone who had proved that persistence, passion, and patience could change everything. The music had transformed him, and now he was ready for whatever came next. After that first unforgettable performance, life started to change for him in ways he had never imagined. People who had once ignored him now greeted him with respect. Teachers who had doubted his ability began to offer guidance, patience, and encouragement. Volunteers and other students sought him out to see how he practiced, how he learned, and how he could perform so beautifully despite never having formal lessons before. At first, it was overwhelming. So many people wanted to talk to him, ask questions, or even give advice. Sometimes he didn't know how to respond, but he learned quickly that listening was just as important as speaking. Every piece of advice, every word of encouragement was a chance to learn more, to grow stronger, and to improve his music. He paid attention to everything, taking it all in quietly and thoughtfully. The community center started noticing his talent in a bigger way. They decided to create a small scholarship specifically for him so he could receive proper lessons. This meant he could now have access to more time on the piano, better guidance from teachers, and materials he had never imagined before. For a boy who had spent years standing outside a hall, dreaming and listening through a window, this was more than a gift. It was an opportunity to finally turn years of patience into real progress. With this new opportunity, he devoted himself completely to learning. Each day, he would arrive early at the center and leave late, making sure every minute was spent improving. He practiced scales, worked on complex pieces, and learned to read music properly. Even when it was difficult, even when his fingers hurt or he made mistakes, he never gave up. He remembered the long months of waiting outside, the no's he had heard so many times, and the music that had kept him hopeful all along. Those memories pushed him forward when he wanted to quit. Over time, his skill grew exponentially. He could play pieces that once seemed impossible, perform complicated melodies flawlessly, and even begin to add his own expression to every note. But more importantly, he started to understand that music was about more than just playing the right notes. It was about telling a story, sharing emotion, and connecting with the audience. He remembered the first time he had played in the recital and seen people moved by the music. That memory stayed with him and became a guiding force. As he continued practicing and performing, he started to inspire others. Children who had once thought that music was only for those with money or special opportunities began to see that talent, dedication, and passion could overcome almost any obstacle. They watched him with curiosity, sometimes even asking to sit beside him during practice to learn by observing. He encouraged them, explaining that anyone could achieve something great if they stayed patient, worked hard, and never stopped believing in themselves. One day, during a small community concert, a young girl approached him shyly. She had been watching him for months, hoping to learn piano herself but feeling too afraid to try. "I wish I could play like you," she whispered. The boy smiled gently. "You can," he said. "It takes time and you have to practice, but you can do it. The music is for everyone who wants it." She nodded, her eyes wide with hope, and walked away determined to try. Moments like these made him realize that his journey was no longer just about him. His music and his story could give others courage, hope, and inspiration. Even his family noticed the change. They had always supported him quietly, but now they saw how far he had come. The shy boy who had stood outside the music hall, dreaming of touching the piano, had grown into a young musician with skill, confidence, and determination. They felt proud, not just because he could play beautifully, but because he had shown perseverance, patience, and resilience in the face of so many challenges. Opportunities began to appear beyond the community center. Invitations to perform at local events, small concerts, and even charity gatherings came his way. Each performance was a chance to share his music and, more importantly, to remind himself and others that hard work and patience pay off. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble. He knew that every success was built on years of quiet dedication, of listening, practicing alone, and refusing to give up even when the door seemed closed. One evening, after a long day of practice and a small recital, He sat alone at the piano, thinking about his journey. He pressed a key gently and listened to the note resonate. He remembered the first day he had ever touched the piano, the first melody he had played, and all the times he had been told no. He realized that those moments had been important. They had taught him persistence, focus, and patience. Without those struggles, he might never have learned to appreciate music the way he did or to feel its power in his heart. He began composing more of his own music. Each piece told a stories of hope, of struggle, of waiting, and of triumph. Sometimes he wrote music inspired by the children he had met, imagining the dreams they carried and the obstacles they faced. Other times he wrote about his own journey, capturing the emotions of every moment, every lesson, and every small victory. His compositions were simple yet powerful, touching everyone who listened, and making people feel the emotions he had felt in his own life. The community center decided to organize a special event in his honor, celebrating his achievements and dedication. They invited all the children who had been inspired by him, all the volunteers, teachers, and families who had supported him, and even some new students who had never met him before. He was nervous but also excited, standing on the stage, surrounded by people who had watched his journey. He realized how far he had come. He was no longer the boy who waited outside a hall, dreaming of playing the piano. He was now someone who could share his gift, inspire others, and make a difference with music. When he played at the event, the audience was silent, fully absorbed in the sound. Every note he played carried his story, his patience, and his determination. People were moved to tears, smiles, and silent awe. After he finished, the applause was overwhelming. He felt proud, not because of the recognition, but because he knew he had stayed true to himself, had never given up, and had followed the path his passion had opened for him. The volunteers and teachers approached him afterward. "You've changed this place," one said. "You've shown everyone that determination and passion can make impossible things possible." He smiled softly. "I just kept listening, learning, and hoping," he replied. "Anyone can do it if they try." As months passed, he continued to grow as a musician. He performed at more events, composed more original pieces, and inspired more young students to pursue music. Each new opportunity reminded him of the long journey he had taken from standing outside the hall, listening quietly, to performing on stage with confidence and skill. He knew that every refusal, every moment of doubt, had been necessary to teach him resilience, patience, and the true value of hard work, even more than the music itself. He realized that the lessons he had learned along the way were what mattered most. He learned that doors might be closed for a time, but persistence, patience, and belief in oneself could eventually open them. He learned that encouragement from even one person, the volunteer who first noticed him, could change the course of a life. He learned that small steps, taken every day, could lead to something extraordinary. In the end, the piano that had once seemed out of reach became a symbol not just of music, but of hope, opportunity, and the rewards of persistence. The boy who had begged just to touch it was now a young musician who had not only touched the piano, but had also touched the hearts of everyone who listened to him. He continued to play, teach, and inspire. Every note reminded him of the long path he had traveled and the dreams he had once held quietly in his heart. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he had proven to himself and to everyone around him that no matter how impossible something may seem, patience, courage, and dedication could make the impossible possible. The boy who had once been denied, who had once waited outside a door, who had once dreamed quietly alone, had become a living example of hope. His music told a story not just of talent, but of perseverance, of never giving up, and of the incredible power of believing in oneself. And in every note he played, he carried forward the lesson that dreams are worth chasing, no matter how long it takes. From that day on, the piano was no longer just an instrument for him. It was a bridge between dreams and reality, between silence and sound, between waiting and achieving. And as he played, he knew that the journey he had begun so long ago would continue to inspire others for years to come.